My guest today is Jenny Brandemuehl, author of Forever Fly Free, One Woman's Story of Resilience and the Power of Hope and Love, a memoir that begins with a single phone call that shattered life as she knew it. Jenny, you are very welcome.
Sharon, thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk to you because again, it's a story of our humanity, of the love that we have in our lives and the love that is shattered through tragic events. Can you please tell us, the listeners, about that single phone call that shattered your life as you knew it?
Yeah. So back in June of 2019, my husband Mark and I were about to retire from our corporate jobs. And we're skiers, hikers, outdoor people. We were looking forward to spending more time with friends and family. And our family was very active. We had two boys, in their 20s. Life was good. We were on top of the world at that time. Now, Mark, my husband, was a recreational pilot for 20 years. He grew up on a dairy farm in the Midwest, US. And so he'd been operating farm equipment since he was 11 years old, driving tractors. So I trusted him. Anyway, that day he was flying to Scottsdale, Arizona for a 1 day executive checkup at the Mayo Clinic. He wanted to make sure everything was good from a health perspective before he was going to retire. And so off he went. I was at work. And then the next day, I receive a phone call. And it's Mark. He's calling me from ER. And he said to me three things. Something's happened to the plane. I love you very much, Jenny, and I'm in for a long, long recovery. And that's all I knew. And then he put the doctor on, and the doctor just talk, 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 all this medical jargon. I did not understand a word he said. In fact, I'm sitting there thinking, what happened to the plane? What happened? And the doctor said, I really don't know. We were just on the receiving end in ER, and I'm trying to treat your husband. And I said, all right, all I need to know is, are his injuries life-threatening? And if they are, I'll be on the first plane to Phoenix. And he said, yes, absolutely. And so that was all I needed to know. I hung up. I drove home from the office. Our oldest son was home at the time, helped me get a flight to Phoenix. And the press were calling me as I'm getting on the plane. I have no idea what's happened. Anyway, what eyewitnesses recounted for me later, because when I arrived, by the way, Sharon, my husband was just in an induced coma, a medically induced coma. He's just a giant mummy. He's 6'2" tall guy, and he's just completely wrapped up. But when I heard later from eyewitnesses who stepped forward and also the articles that I read, they said, look, he had taken off from Scottsdale Airport, and about 7 minutes after takeoff, he reported a rough running engine and declared emergency. They tried to direct him to a suburban, smaller airport. He wasn't going to make it. He was trying to emergency land on a 2-lane road in the suburb when he saw three cars on the road. And so, to avoid hitting them, he had swerved to the right. But again, think of it, the plane had no engine power. It's careening. The right wing clipped two light poles. The fuel tanks in small planes are in the wings. It caught on fire. It hit a concrete barrier, flipped upside down, and it crash landed face down on the side of the road. Now, the amazing part of the story that later again eyewitnesses told me, there was a good Samaritan named Thomas Honeycutt who happened to be driving on that road that day with his partner. He said he got out of the plane, and by the way, he is forever family for me. He got out of the plane and he said, I mean, out of his car, and he said, all these people were filming. I was so angry, so angry. I knew they called 911, but I thought to myself, if someone doesn't go rescue the pilot now, he's going to die. And so Thomas ran out there. He's in shorts, he's in, sandals. He said to himself as he was running, if the pilot still has his seatbelt on, I won't be able to save him. And he said, literally, when he got up to the cockpit window, which was completely cracked open, he said he saw the seatbelt melt off my husband's body. in that moment. And by the way, there was another early bystander, a woman who was also on the scene first before Thomas. And she said, I was so distressed, I didn't know what to do. And I just prayed for your husband. And we pieced it together and realized that when she prayed and when Thomas got to the cockpit window, that happened at the same time. So, and then two men came running over, helped Thomas carry my husband to safety across the road, and then the plane exploded. And so that's what happened. And I think that really it was just many of us were in shock. It was what, as we talked about before this podcast, Sharon, your life can just change in an instant. It did for me. My
Mm.
life was on a happy autopilot, and everything changed immediately in that moment. And I don't spend time thinking about why it happened. I spent a lot of time just trying to get through day by day at the burn center. So at the burn center, he suffered third degree burns on over 80% of his body. They had to amputate his legs about a month into his stay. I think the doctor was trying to tell me he was going to die the first 2 weeks. Now, Mark's a fighter. He's a lover of life. We live life to the fullest, no regrets. And he somehow survived sepsis, blood clot, multiple infections, completely fluctuating vitals. Because what happens is when you lose your largest protective covering, which is your skin, your body is subject to a lot of dysregulation. So 4.5 months into this, he came out of the coma. He could actually talk to me through tracheotomy. We were able to say we love each other. We were able to talk. The three sentences, the first sentences he said when he came out of his coma were, one, I want to mix and mingle. In other words, I want to go to a party. The man had 5 tuxedos. He loved a good party. The second thing he said was, I want to go on an adventure, which really meant get me out of this hospital now. And the third, he said, I want a martini.
Mm.
And his doctor said to me, we will get him a martini once he's off his respiratory machine and the tracheotomy. Tell me, what kind of gin does he like? And I said, Bombay Sapphire up with a twist. Ah, a gentleman, he said. But that was the kind of man he was. And we felt that he was going to come home disabled, but that he would make the best of it and be resourceful and figure out how to do adaptive skiing. I mean, he was a double black diamond skier. So 2 weeks later, in the fifth month, and by the way, we were two-thirds through his skin grafts, and skin graft technology is amazing, Sharon. I mean, they can take postage-sized stamps of your skin and grow it in a lab now, and they staple it all over your body, and within 4 to 6 weeks, those little islands of skin begin to form and grow together to form one big piece of skin. And so he was two-thirds into that journey, and we thought he was going to make it. And then he caught a hospital infection that was resistant to antibiotics, and he was gone in 24 hours. And so it was just a huge shock because we all thought he was going to make it.
Oh, Jenny, I am so sorry. Wow, when you tell it, and I know that is 5 months, that was day by day for you, but when you break it down just in telling the story, it may seem like, you know, you got through it. But what was that day-to-day process like for you as a witness and observer of someone that you've loved for,
Yeah.
over 3 decades, and even looking after your son's well-being and trying to comfort their emotional needs as well. And then watching Mark, I mean, physically, there must have been a lot of pain and even the
Yeah.
awareness of legs being amputated and skin grafts. I
Yeah.
can't even imagine, Jenny, what you went through.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I learned to do, Sharon, is you can only take one day at a time. I journaled every day. I've always been a bit of a writer, and I felt that that was one of the private ways I could process what was going on emotionally in ways, when you don't even know what to speak,
Mm.
right? That writing is a way to just sort of work through that. I did that every day. I did take care of myself. I think many caregivers feel guilty about taking of self-care because their loved ones are going through such a challenging time. And what I did was I thought to myself, my husband's in a coma. I have to make all the medical decisions. I cannot let him down. I have to be strong for him. And so I did go into a mode of every morning, I ate a big breakfast, I exercised, I took care of myself. I tried to sleep. It was hard, but I got one of those guided meditation apps. So if I woke up in the middle of the night, that would help me get back to sleep. And I took naps if I needed to, because I knew if I were useless, I would be unhelpful for him.
Mm.
And so that was a driving motivator for me. And they always had to do his dressing change. You know, they have to keep the body really clean. So that took 2 to 3 hours every morning. So I had morning to myself, right? And so that's when I did some of my self-care because I'd be at the hospital in ICU until 8 o'clock that night, from about noon till 8 o'clock every day. I think the other thing that I learned, and I look back now, realize we always had hope. I always had hope. Hope, I discovered, is incredibly powerful. And I realized that the doctors modeled that for me. They never said never, and they never said always. And at one point, Mark was diagnosed with a near fatal fungal infection. And the doctors were trying to say, not directly, that they didn't think he was going to make it through the weekend. And so they said, call the whole family in. We're going to have a meeting. They came in, and the doctor said, there are three potential scenarios for Mark. One, he takes a turn for the better. Two, the infection which started in his arms will spread further and we have to amputate his arms, which I was just devastated about that possibility. The third option is that it spreads to his internal organs and he dies immediately. And so, but what I realized is that's a range of possibilities, right? And so my definition of hope is not about expectation, but a belief in possibilities, that there are always possibilities. And I think that that hope carried me through the 5 months at the Arizona Burn Center. And after he died, I think that hope carried me in the sense that I could be happy again one day. Maybe not right away, but that I could. And I knew after 2 years when I was learning, who am I without my husband, right? That I do think I'm wired for partnership. And could I find another soulmate? Again, hope.
Yeah. Hope is one of the last things I think we have when all else is falling apart. And I hear that from many
Uh,
people. And again, that hope sometimes is an expectation, but I love the way that you put it, that it's possibility. And that's something that's really important that we can hold on to, Jenny, isn't it? When, as we said, you have no control over the
yeah.
situation of another person, and taking it day by day is the best thing we can do for ourselves and for our loved ones. One of the things that we spoke about before we recorded was not only you journaling, but that you used to post daily from the burn center. Can you tell us about that, please, Jenny?
Yes, I did. I did do that. What happened was because I was away from home, we're from Northern California near San Francisco. And so we had a few family friends in Arizona, but I didn't know very many people. My community wasn't there. And so I found one of those online caregiver communities, and friends and family registered to be online, and I provided daily medical posts. And as I was saying before our interview, I was a very private person before, very stoic. That was kind of who I was. I didn't share widely about struggles I had before. And it was the first time I went from actually posting medical updates to pouring my heart out online and sharing kind of all the challenges, what I was going through emotionally. I shared the story about how Mark and I met because not everybody knew that. And it was just really from a deep well of love for who Mark was. We'd been together, known each other 30 years, and shared a whole life together, raised two boys. And what was interesting is it created, I think, a really virtuous circle of love because, for example, Mark went to business school at Stanford. These are people who get together online to talk about, hey, I have a startup. Anybody know an interim CFO I could hire, right? That's the nature of their interactions. And they told me for the first time the courage of Thomas Honeycutt and Mark in avoiding the drivers on the road, and also what we were going through, inspired them so much that they started sharing more deeply about their own health crises and their own, tough chapters in life, and just at such a deeper level than they had before. And then, and other people in the community started sharing their own stories. And so I feel like it was more than what I received, it was what they were giving to each other as well. It was a beautiful thing. And I never would have expected that that would happen. And the amount of outpouring of love and support I received was a real lifeline for me. And so that's why I wrote the book. It was because after the ordeal I went through, many people said to me, after reading your posts online, Jenny, they were so inspiring. You must write a book because people who are going through difficult times, even if it isn't as traumatic as what you've gone through, would be inspired and would believe that they had a way and a path to navigate through their tough times.
So beautiful. And in that, it's just that I feel it so much in my heart because it's a lovely sharing of your vulnerability. And I always say when we share from a vulnerable place, we give permission for others to share also,
Yes,
that they feel like, wow, if Jenny can do this,
right.
maybe I can share a little bit as well. And we all start feeling more supported when we're sharing because it's our authentic feelings and emotions in those moments, isn't
Mhm.
it? It's coming from, as you said, that deep well of love or concern or worry or hope, and that coming together, you form this community of support for not just you and your sons, but for friends and people that are from Stanford that went to college with Mark. And somehow you grew closer and closer in connection.
Yes, that's right. I feel like love, one of the things I learned, Sharon, is that love is an energy, not just an emotion. And let me share a story with you, a couple of them. A dear friend, Lila, came to visit Mark at the Burn Center from Boston. And Lila's a materialist. If she can't see it, feel it, touch it, she doesn't believe it exists, right? And she walked into Mark's room. I gave her private time with Mark, and she said, there is some kind of energy in his room, Jenny. I cannot describe it. I have never experienced it. What is it? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm here every day. I suppose I don't notice it. And she wouldn't stop talking about it. She didn't understand what it was, and she left. And I'll tell you, after Mark died, she said to me, I was preparing for his memorial service in celebration of life. I was thinking about what I wanted to say to him. And then I got so sad, I just broke down crying. And she said, I suddenly felt surrounded by an overwhelming feeling of love, and I knew it was his presence. And he told me, Lila, I'm fine. And she told me the story with such certainty. And she said to me, Jenny, when the time is right, you will hear from Mark. And I was just astounded. The second story about love as an energy is there was a younger nurse who took care of Mark multiple times, lovely young woman. And one day, Mark was having a really hard time, and I was at a doctor's appointment. So she actually went out of her way to call me at the doctor's and put Mark on speakerphone so that he could hear my voice and be reassured. Now, that's going above and beyond.
Mm.
Most nurses will just say, Mark, it's okay. Jenny will be here in 2 hours. Hang in there. She'll be here. Instead, she puts him on speakerphone. And so I could say, honey, I love you. I'm so sorry that you're feeling anxious. You're going to get through this. I'll be there soon. When I got back to the hospital, I said to the nurse, why did you do that? That was so nice of you. And she said, because of the love that I have seen between the two of you. She said, it's inspired me to raise, I'm almost going to get tears here, Sharon. It inspired me to raise the bar for who I would want to date and marry one day. And do you know, after Mark died, she got in touch and told me that she became engaged to the male nurse who took care of Mark the day he
Oh,
died. I know
wow.
both of them. I know both of them. They are both the kindest people. They belong together. And she said to me, when we're ready to have the wedding, you must come with your boys because you are one of the reasons why we even got together. And to me, that's an example that love has a ripple effect. It's an energy more than just an emotion.
Absolutely. You're so true, Jenny. And I love just that even that feeling, that your friend Lila could feel that energy in the room and didn't know what it was.
Mhm.
But that it's tangible. You can feel it, but maybe not
Yeah,
recognize the depth of it. But it's overwhelming at times when you feel
yeah,
it. And that even And it's so strange at times. People say in the worst times of life, you'll see other good things happening. So for
mhm.
that young nurse, female nurse, and getting engaged to the male nurse, but you even creating that community and allowing other people to be their authentic expression of who they are and what
Yeah.
they're going through, that is just what love means, isn't it? It's
Yes,
just so
yes.
powerful.
I feel like love is also an action. So Thomas, I've always said this, Thomas Honeycutt and rescuing Mark, that is love in action.
Mm.
Right? That he would care so much. And I remember a friend of Mark's said to him, I'm musing to myself, if I were in your shoes, what would I have done? Would I have run out to rescue somebody and risk my own life? And by the way, Thomas Honeycutt won a Carnegie Hero Award, which they give to only 4 people in the US every quarter who put their own life at risk to save someone else. And this friend Jeff asked himself that question and he said, I really honestly don't know. It was a very authentic answer. I don't think I'll know until I'm in the situation. And Thomas said, hands down, I would always run out there to help somebody. And so to me, that is also love. And by the way, I might mention just the close loop on the story of Lila. She looked back after she felt she heard from Mark. She said, that energy in his room was love.
Mm.
I now know that was love. But she didn't understand that until after he died.
No, that is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And the fact that she even felt that connection with him after his passing and could feel it, and to feel the peace he was giving her as well, that he was
Yeah.
fine, that he was
Yeah.
okay. When did you feel that, Jenny, for yourself after Mark's passing?
Well, so about, let's see, 5 months after he died, I had a migraine. I get vestibular migraines where I'm dizzy, and usually he would drive me to the vestibular therapist for a procedure. And here I was at home alone, and I did make it by myself. My son was in a new job, so I couldn't ask him to drive me at that time. He was busy. And I got through it. But when I was recovering and washing the dishes and finally cleaning up at home one day, I felt an overwhelming feeling of love, just the way Lila described it. And Mark said to me, I am so sorry that I'm not there to help you. And so that was the first time I heard from him. And what I have learned, and I write about this in my book, is that many people heard from him, and a few people had premonitions before he died that things would happen. So I do go through some of those stories in the book. So, for example, my cousin, his mother who died years ago, he said he had a dream the night before Mark died, and she told him that Mark was going to pass. We had a family friend who was in a knitting circle and she didn't have access to Wi-Fi. And she said the day that Mark died, at exactly the same time, looking back now, she had a great feeling of dread that something had happened. And then the next day, when she got on Wi-Fi, she realized that it was the same time he died. So we had many stories like that, as well as people afterwards who heard from Mark. Dear friend said she heard from Mark and he said, take care of Jenny.
No.
Please take care of Jenny. And I joined a grief support group for those who lost a spouse or a partner. And it was interesting because I shared some of these stories, and I would say 3 out of 5 of them all had stories like that, that someone had passed in their family, not necessarily their partner or spouse, and that someone else in the family heard from them. It's not uncommon. It's more common than we realize. It's just that most people think, am I crazy? I'm not going to share this with people. But because I openly shared these stories, then other people feel like it's safe to share theirs as well.
Mm.
And so it happens more than we realize.
It absolutely does. And you're making me smile because, again, I would feel spirit, as I call them, that they're just the physical is gone, but they're very much present with us in love because love is
Mhm.
infinite and we can't destroy
Yeah.
energy scientifically. So their presence exists beyond the physical, for me. But I love the openness of everybody afterwards, after such a tragic loss, in Mark, in your lives, and
Mhm.
that it opened up something within all of you to be able to receive his love still and his support and comfort, for you that are physically still living in the world, having to cope with day-to-day
Right.
life without him. If you had said this to yourself, Jenny, years ago before anything happened to Mark, would you have believed that that connection of love could be as strong after death?
Absolutely not. I was a type A corporate type of person. I worked in, the tech industry, the fashion industry, telecom for 25 years. And it's not that I wasn't a kind person, it was just this sort of thing I wouldn't have understood because I had not experienced it. And one of the things I learned, Sharon, through my experience was to trust my inner voice and intuition. And let me give you an example. When Mark had that fungal infection, remember the three scenarios? It was life-threatening, it was terrible. The next day after the family flew in for the meeting, I'm in the waiting room and I heard a small voice say to me, Mark will be fine. Don't worry, don't doubt. And I thought, my goodness, I'm losing my mind. I must be so stressed out by this whole situation with Mark that I'm starting to hear things, right? And then the next morning, I heard it again. Mark will be fine. Don't worry, don't doubt. I was at my condo that I had rented and I had just come back from working out and I thought, okay, I got to pay attention to this.
Mm.
But where's this coming from? Is it God? Is it my intuition? Is it my inner voice? And I look back now, it doesn't matter. It really didn't matter. The fact was, I heard it again. And then the third morning in a row, I heard it again. And do you know, Sharon, 6 weeks later, he was clear of it. It never spread, it never went to those bad scenarios. He survived it. And I think it was the first time I began to learn to trust my intuition. And what I realized, because after he died, I started trying to meditate every day. I have a monkey mind and I struggle with it. And I read this great article, an Oprah article, where she said, you know what? Just every month of the year, in January, start with 1 minute. Just meditate for 1 minute. February, add another minute. Just add a minute for every month successively. And by December, you'll be meditating 12 minutes a day. And I thought, well, I can do that. that feels very achievable. And so I started meditating. And I have to say that what I realized, and then I also, by the way, let me just mention, I learned a heart coherent method of meditation. I always thought, well, the Buddhist way, the Hindu way, the Christian way. And I thought, I learned so much about love. I experienced it so much at the Burns Center. Surely there's a love-based way to meditate. And I discovered there was an 8-week program online during COVID with the HeartMath Institute, which has done research on this. And so when you're in a place of love consciousness, and inner stillness, that's when you hear the voice the clearest. And in our constantly on digital world, we're also easily distracted that you miss all the signs, right? You miss all the voices. And I think we get disconnected from our bodies. And that is one of the things I had to heal and learn from because I had a little bit of PTSD going on is that we live in our head so much in modern life, and we don't really recognize that our body can also give us some very clear messages. And, Martha Beck, the famous coach who's written a lot of books, she said, listen to what your body's telling you when you're making a decision. She tells a great story about how she was about to take a job at Harvard teaching, and she drove to the building, and her body she just didn't feel well, right? And so
Mm.
now when I make decisions, I listen for my intuition and that voice. I get into a quiet place and I try to ask, what is my heart? my head and my body telling me. And if it's out of alignment, I kind of hit the pause button and explore. And I don't rush any decision now.
That is wonderful, Jenny. It really is. You're speaking all of the words that I would, work with my clients and groups
Mm,
because, when
yeah.
I started meditating over 30 years ago now, and again, it was through, a trauma response that I needed to listen to my body and what it needed. And I always say it's the simplest way to be with yourself without expectation and just to be present. But in times like that of great tragedy, shock, and grief, our senses are heightened, obviously. So
Mm,
for you, you were much more aware of everything. So it allowed you to connect with that inner voice, connect with your intuition, and
right.
even afterwards, connecting with Mark's essence, his energy, that he was able to connect with you.
Mhm.
It's amazing because, as you said, many people have stories after such tragic losses, and they'll say, like you, I was never that type of person. I would have woo-wooed that away. And
Right.
now it's just opened up my world. It's opened up my heart. It's opened up this connection for me that I'm always going to have, which is such a beautiful thing to do or to have in your life, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. I grew up very close to my father, and he came from a military family. And so I think he role modeled for me being, I think fathers teach mastery of the world to their children, and mothers care more about sort of what's happening in your heart and your emotions. And, every parent's different, but that maybe is generally maybe the way the genders are different around parenting. And so I identified more with my father. And I think when I was 15, I rejected my mother. My mother was sort of emotionally not the most stable.
Mm.
And I think I rejected her at one point. And I have now realized, looking back, that I followed the masculine model, stereotypically masculine model for how I coped in life. And so some of the personal growth that I went into after Mark died was to really find a better balance between the intuitive and the intellectual, or the what you might call the stereotypically feminine and masculine energies.
Mm.
And two, as to your point, began to open up my heart more consistently and to operate from that level of knowledge and experience in a way I hadn't before. And
Mm.
it is amazing how it opens up the world in such a different way. And you see, I felt like I started to have like new glasses,
Yeah.
to see through the lens so differently. And, I think of that wonderful quote from the Italian writer Beppe Severini. He says, Italians see people, whereas other cultures look at people. And I never understood what that meant until I went through what I went through. Because now when I see strangers and I meet people, I see their humanity right away. I see who they are. I cut through the chase. It doesn't matter what they do for a living, what their external packaging is, what they look like. I get right to the heart of things with them in a way that I didn't used to. And I think that's what happens when you go through trials and tribulations of your own.
Mm. In fact, really, and again, it kind of repeats in my mind over and over, is that what you really have found is this true connection to yourself, that you're now allowing
Yeah.
yourself to be truly seen by others, not just to see them, but to truly see yourself, not with the worry or having to put on that mask to be, as you
Right.
said, defined by your career, your relationships, or what you are, or who you are, but just that you're showing up as your true self, and that when you're meeting people, that gives them permission to also be
Right.
their true selves. Isn't that so beautiful, Jenny?
It is beautiful. You realize that you have more common ground with people than you realize. I mean, the world is going through a difficult time right now, but at the heart of it, as humans, we all want to be loved. We want to feel safe. We want to feel that we're cared for. And we actually have a lot more in common. I discovered that when I was in the waiting room at the Arizona Burn Center. It was a very diverse place. It was part of a county hospital. And so they had prisoners at the local prison come in through ER because the entrance to the burn center at that time was through ER. So you saw this whole range of humanity. There was a huge family there, 12 people I remember from a Native American reservation, the Navajo Nation in northwestern Arizona. And they were the loveliest people, but we were all there because we shared something in common, that there was a loved one who suffered a great burn trauma, and how people opened up to each other. And there was another African American family there. They used to routinely pray for Mark, and I would pray for them. They had church members coming to visit all the time. I mean, it was just such a beautiful community in that waiting room with, the common need that we were all there for a loved one who had suffered.
Isn't it in one way sad that we have to wait until
Mm,
tragedy strikes in our lives for us to realize our own humanity or the humanity of the people
mhm,
around us? And just as you said, that we're not very different to each other at all when you strip everything else away, but that we've become so disconnected, from each other, our kindness or compassion for each other,
yeah,
but that in times of need that you'll see that humanity come out 100% more
yeah,
in everybody. But maybe that's why you're sharing your story, Jenny, is to remind people where you were once that maybe black and white, organized, practical person, that
mhm,
because of your love for Mark and his love for you, and through this tragedy, that it opened up something that you are now helping
yeah,
other people to see and to find and
yeah.
to feel within their lives.
Yeah, I think there are a couple thoughts that come to mind because that's such a great observation, Sharon. That why is it that we have to go through tough times, and are there not ways to learn? I read a great book recently by a centenarian named Dr. Gladys McGready. I'm trying to remember her name. McGrady. Anyway, McGready. She wrote a book when she was 102. She has since passed at 103, but
Mhm.
her book is called The Well-Lived Life, and it's 10 decades of wisdom of what she learned as a doctor, but also personally. And the single quote I remember that is so simple from her book is, "Everything in life is your teacher." And I thought, how interesting. I have always been a curious person, and I was a psychology major at uni. And I think that I've always been interested and curious, even if it wasn't my experience at the time. And so I think I'd encourage listeners to really be open and to stay curious and to just be lifelong learners about everything. Because I think when those tough times come, and I learned that there is no guarantee in life, change is the only guarantee. And how do you start from a place of being a learner?
Mm,
Because I think that really begins to equip you for going through whatever life brings you in the ups and downs, right? We'll all have them in good times and bad. And I feel like that really helped um, me learn. The second thing I was going to mention is, because I had changed, and I started dating 2 years after Mark died. Everybody's different in their journey of grief and loss, right? I was someone who said, I want to be happy again. I've been sad for 2 years. I've been in shock. I've gone through figuring out, who am I without my husband, right? I went from we to me, as my friend Dr. Connie Mariano said. She lost her husband the same year. And after I figured out who I was, and 80% of me was still intact. Mark and I were very independent people, but I always say we were better together in a delightful way.
yeah.
I mean, we complemented each other, and socially, we enjoyed being together with friends and family. But we were independent people. We had interests. And anyway, so I discovered 80% of me was still intact. And, um, you know, I decided it was time to start dating. And I thought, my goodness, I haven't dated since I was 24. I met Mark in the first job after uni. And so I thought, who am I? And what am I even attracted to now? And here's the beautiful thing, the second time around when your children are older It's actually very pure, the criteria. It's not about building a career, it's not about building a family together or a financial future. Now it's really purely love and companionship. And so I think, again, being open, and I said, I'm going to go online. I'm going to learn. I'm not going to put any pressure on myself about meeting the one. I'm just going to try it. I'm going to put my big toe in the water. In a weird role reversal, my 23-year-old son was the one mentoring me on how to do this.
I
Give
love
me
it.
feedback of my profile and be safe, mom. There's scammers out there. Anyway, and here's the amazing thing, because I think it's an example of a culmination of all that I learned, which was trusting my instinct and my intuition, being open, being a learner, and being open to love again. Um, I went through 5 months of dating, didn't hit it off. Chemistry wasn't right. One guy lied about his age, another one stood me up on a coffee date, ran the whole range, and, I got through it. 5 months into this, Robert, my partner, reached out to me. And it was very interesting, Sharon, because first of all, he's from Carlsbad, California, which is just north of San Diego. It's a beach community. And I had been there a lot with my kids. And before Mark and I decided to retire, we were going to retire to Lake Tahoe mountains, lake, skiing, hiking. I had said to Mark, I grew up on the coast, in the East Coast of US. I still want a beach cottage in Carlsbad. I told no one else. It just didn't come up in conversation. People knew I liked it, but he said, duly noted. I'll remember that. Maybe we'll look into that sometime in the future. And Robert showed up from Carlsbad. And by the way, I wasn't looking to date anybody long distance. In fact, I was very close to it. But when he showed up, I thought, wow, Carlsbad. And then we have found out since we've been together 3 years. And it didn't even make it. I'm sharing this with listeners because it didn't even make it into the book, because I didn't really realize some of these synchronicities and signs until a year ago. We realized that back in 1989, when we were both newlyweds, he was married to his wife, I was married to mine, we both had our weddings that year, that we actually were working at the same company and we never got introduced. He was a consultant from LA driving up to Northern California for this job or for a consulting gig, I don't know, once every 2 weeks. And I had only just started at that company and worked there 10 months after moving from New York to San Francisco area. And so we probably absolutely passed in the hallway, but never got introduced in the lunchroom, in the hallway. And then fast forward to 2019, we discovered that we were living in the same neighborhood of Phoenix with our respective spouses receiving treatment. His wife eventually died of cancer, and they were in that suburb, a part of Phoenix, for her to receive alternative cancer treatment right before she died. And then I was there with Mark at the Burn Center, and he was staying at the Marriott Hotel 5 blocks from my Airbnb. And the only way we discovered that, I was out there to visit, and he came out to visit. This was a couple years ago or a year ago. And he said, oh, I used to shop at that supermarket there. Oh, I used to go to that pizza restaurant over there. And I said, what? You stayed here? He said, yeah, I was at the Marriott Hotel. I said, that's 5 blocks from my condo. And then we met 2 years later. He found me online. And by the way, he said, it was an accident that I found you. What do you mean? He said he was so new to online dating. We both are, right? We both met our spouses early in life, pre online dating. He said, I was visiting family in Oakland, up in Northern California, and I did a search and I found you. And I didn't realize that the algorithm had localized my search to where I was. And so I thought you were from LA. And so when we got on our first video call, the first question he asked me was, I'm from a suburb called Mountain View. Where's Mountain View, California? And I thought, why don't you know this? You're the one who found me. He says, oh, you're in Northern California. Ah, here's what happened. And so it's very interesting. Is it destiny? Is it fate? Friends have said it was like the two of you were circling each other your entire life until you were ready to meet.
Mm,
And so signs and synchronicities are another phenomena I think that happens all around us. And back to what I said before, if you're not paying attention and you're distracted every day, you
mm.
don't notice them because it's happening all the time. I am convinced of that now.
Definitely. And definitely with synchronicity. I had an image of, there was a movie out years ago called Sliding Doors. And it's
Oh,
like, do you
yeah.
remember that? So it
Yes.
is. And I've often heard people saying, they might have met their partner later on, but they
Yes.
had another life with somebody else before that. And they had been in the same country in holidays. They had been
Yeah.
friends with mutual friends. And it's like,
Yeah.
how did we never meet? But just as you said, until you are ready, because
Yeah.
both of your life experiences can now blend together. You've both had
Mhm.
very similar losses in losing someone that you loved and coming together at a time where you said it wasn't about starting a family, it wasn't about the careers, it was just about love and
Yeah.
companionship. And you were both ready at that time, the perfect
Exactly.
time, as I call it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, Robert is completely different than Mark, my late husband. And it's because I was ready for a different kind of partner, right?
Because you're different as
I'm
well. Yeah,
different.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, this goes back to your point, Sharon, about being vulnerable. I mean, I grew up with a very stoic father. He came from a military family. It was strength, right? And so I learned I am calm on the outside when everything's falling apart around me, but I have a lot of internal intensity. And one of the things I realized is I didn't know how to ask for help until I had to. Mark and I were both firstborn in our families. We were used to taking care of our siblings, not the other way around, right? And I remember Robert asked me, after hearing all my stories of being independent early in our dating history, he asked, "Are you okay with being taken care of now, Jenny?" And I had to really think about that. And I thought, how interesting. So, Robert is a very caring, creative, sensitive person. And not that Mark wasn't, but they're so different in their emotional makeup and their sensibility and the way they look that I don't even compare them, right? I
No.
mean, that's the beautiful thing because Robert, I found another soulmate.
Yeah.
I mean, wow, I'm amazed. And I heard again my intuition, that small voice when I was meditating back when I started. I heard, you'll meet another soulmate when you establish a daily spiritual practice. And I do mean spiritual in a very inclusive sense, right? I mean, regardless of what your practice of faith
Mhm.
is, I do believe now, going back to the concept of love, that our energy does continue after physical death,
Mhm.
and it just takes a different form, and that love is often that form, and that's where we all came from originally, from a place of love. And on the topic of destiny and sliding doors, to your point about the movie, I feel like destiny will bring you to meet certain people, will show up in your path,
Mhm.
but we all have free will and choice. And it is still up to us to decide if we're going to continue a friendship or a relationship with that person.
Mhm.
And so if Robert and I at any point decided we would run away and decide this wasn't it for us or choose differently,
Mhm.
then a whole new set of scenarios would unfold. And and then we would continue our learning journey. But thankfully, we recognized that there was something really special in our bond with each other that we committed and we just adore each other.
Oh, I'm so happy for you, Jenny.
Thank you.
I really am, and I want to make a point to people that are listening because you said something really important that the ones that, leave before we do, put it that way, and that we may have been in a relationship or they could be siblings or they want the best for us even
Yeah.
after they leave. They want us to find love and joyful moments and
Yeah.
happiness again in our lives. They do not want us sitting around crying our eyes out forever
Right.
because they're looking at you. You're still alive. You still got the body. Why aren't you going out there and living it?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know that Robert has heard from Mark.
Oh,
And you know what Mark said to him? And he said he saw him and he pointed to me. She loves to laugh. And you know, Robert's actually a very funny person. He makes me laugh every day. He's got a great sense of humor. I mean, sometimes we wake up in the middle of the night, for some reason, and he'll say something funny, and I'm just laughing. I mean, 3 o'clock in the morning. So, yes, our loved ones want us to be happy. I am absolutely sure of that. And they went through, for whatever reason, it was their time to go. And, Mark was in a very contented, happy place in his life. He was one of those aggressive, angry young men when he was young, full of life, full of challenge, loved to debate. And, I'll never forget, his sister said to me, he'd gone out to visit them probably a year before his accident. And he was playing with his little nephew, David, who was maybe 8 years old at the time. And they were in a meadow and just having fun. And he was teasing him and everything, David. And then at one point, he was just lying on the grass, and David's running around. And my sister-in-law, Renee, comes upon the scene and says, "Oh, there you are. I was looking for both of you." And she said to me, Mark turned to her and said, "Isn't this the most perfect moment?"
oh,
And I look back now and I realize he had done a lot in his life. He was a mentor to many young people. He'd softened all those rough edges he had. He was no longer angry at the world. He had come to a place of peace and understanding about what was most important in life. He was not a religious, spiritual person at all, but he was smart enough to say, "I don't know. Is there a loving force in the universe? I don't know." He was a scientist by background, right?
yes.
And I feel like I now look back and see the signs that maybe that was coming with him leaving and exiting out of this world. He said to me, I lost my parents rather young. They were 61 and 59. And I was early on in my 40s, very interested in stories about near-death experiences. So people have died and come back. Well, you can't scientifically prove anything there because the control group has died and didn't come back,
Yeah.
you know. But I read some very authentic stories by Anita Murjani, who had fourth stage lymphoma and came back in remission. Nancy Rhines, who died in a car, she was hit by a car on a bicycle in Boulder, Colorado, and came back. And they all had stories about how they went to a place just full of love. And Anita talks about how her father, who was a very judgmental Indian man,
Mm.
who always wanted her to live the traditional good Indian girl life, marry a good husband, be obedient, and she was a rebel. And he said to her, "Anita, go back and live your life without fear. You got cancer." She realized she got cancer because she was afraid of getting cancer. And then the worst thing that happened was she got it. And she's been in remission ever since. It's been 18 years, I think. And she is full of life now. And so I do believe that our loved ones want us to live our lives
Mm.
and to not sit at home and be sad for the rest of our life.
Mm.
And what I've known some people in my grief support group that spend a lot of time in a downward spiral, feeling hopeless, helpless, everything. And what I've learned from observing them is that it goes back to, what is your definition of hope? And if the only guarantee in life is change, then you have to believe that when bad things happen, good things can happen again too.
Mm.
It isn't always going to be bad. And if you can just sort of bring yourself out of that feeling that all is bad, all these terrible things happen to me, but that there's a light at the end of the tunnel and good things can happen again,
Mm.
then you can kind of find a way to move forward, I think. And, I love Eckhart Tolle. He says, life is an adventure, not a package tour.
Yes.
Have you heard that? I just
Yes, I
love
love
that
him.
because that's what I experientially have now understood about life. And that if you can just live your every day in the moment. As he says, don't dwell on the past, don't overthink the future. Your present moment, day to day, is true reality.
Jenny, it has been a pleasure in this moment and the moments that we have spent in
Yeah,
this hour listening to your wisdom, your learning of something that was so heart-wrenching, but also so heart-opening for you. And I commend you on your honesty and
thank you. Thank you,
your
Sharon.
beautiful truths of your experience, and that you have found love again with Robert. And I have no doubt that Mark is smiling, watching you smile again every day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon, so much. It's been such a delight to speak with you today.
And you, amazing. So, thank you to everybody for listening to that amazing conversation with Jenny. You can go and check out her book, foreverflyfree.com, through her website. You'll find her on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. I will have all the details in my show notes. And again, another inspiring guest that has come through some really hard things in life, as I'm sure some of you have. And I hope that Jenny's hope and love will bring some of that into your heart today as you're listening or watching. You've been listening to the Sharon Fitzmaurice podcast. Until next time, take care of you.